Illumination's Minions and Monsters, because Minions 3 might make it seem like they're making too many of these movies. It's the 7th mainline movie. But to be honest, if they keep making Minion movies like this, I say all the power to them to continue. Because Minions and Despicable Me included has been a bit of a tumultuous franchise over the years, and I think my takes are pretty known about them. We all know Despicable Me 1 was good, Despicable Me 2 debatable, and Despicable Me 3 and 4 are absolute ensemble bloatedly terrible. And then on the Minions side of things, you've got the terrible Minions 1 and a Minions 2 that I really, really adore. I think that last movie finally worked out how to manage the formula of the Minions in a fantastic way, and though it still has its issues, it is leaps and bounds ahead of the new Despicable Me movies. And then they made Despicable Me 4 afterwards and lost all of the wind out of their sails. So come around to Minions 3, and it kind of can go in either direction. They make recent terrible movies we've seen from the franchise, but then one step before, and they made the best one. Higher highs and lower lows. But thankfully enough, if we had to pick between amazing and terrible, Minions 3 is actually easily amazing. And there's kind of a few obvious reasons for it. On the most basic level, this is a movie for cinephiles. If you know your movies, if you know the source material, if you have studied film and you are the type of person to review movies like critics typically do, there are a million things to see that specifically are built to get you on their side. And what's nice is it's not so much done in the Wreck-It Ralph 2 style of point and recognize a logo and recognize a thing, because everything is embellished with the logic of the Minions to always add at least one layer of, wow, it's what you recognize, but somehow the Minions have influenced it, infiltrated it, or invented it themselves. And that alone is just a brilliant foundational level to start your comedy premise with. While later in the timeline we're doing all sorts of Despicable Me things with a bajillion characters and a fully original story in a fictional world, these prequels as of late try to take more of a parody approach of showing us our own world, but not quite as we know it. Treating it as, here's how the world rolls out if the Minions were real. And I think that formula alone just works way better than trying to bring Gru into relevancy with a wife now, and a biological kid, and also a neighbor. You know what I mean? Now, I actually have been a bit of a pro-Minions person for a slightly longer time than normal, since I did really like Minions 2. And the main idea behind that one being so good is they actually really seem to nail down the fact that they are cartoony slapstick characters. There are a lot of jokes that the Minions have generally brought out across all of their film appearances. You know, one of their most famous from the first movie is the fart gun. Okay, easy humor, it works, it's toilet humor, and it's a kid's film, so sure. Which, by the way, got an advert before this movie in cinemas as an actual product you can buy. Had a bunch of teenagers shooting each other with fart guns, which is an interesting choice. Either way, you can now buy a Minions branded fart gun.
Very cool.
What a world. But now with these later Minion projects in particular, they really managed to make these great action set pieces that just go off on one and seem like an incredibly good, well done, raucous experience of a time. In Minions 2, you have a sequence where the Minions are flying a plane and chaos ensues, and now we've moved over to a train and antics ensue. And since they knew what worked so well the last time, they do it a whole 2 times this film. There are 2 really good action sequences that just keep going, they just keep escalating, and now as well, it doesn't just handle a handful of Minions, it's the whole pack doing a million things. And that is several pieces of criticism from the past that are now coming together and sewn into a best version of a not for a Minion story. That being said, I do kind of wish there was more of them. There's 2. There are all sorts of other action scenes and little pokes of chaos, but not at all to the same degree of, oh, this is a big sequence of madness. And if I could ever come to any criticism of this movie, it's I wish there was even more of that. More than 2 of them. But just the fact that we got 2 of them is leaps and bounds beyond anything recent and despicable. It must be an animation nightmare this whole time to actually animate so many Minions. So you know what? I can kind of understand it. But yes, in talking about all of these issues of the past threaded together in a neat little bun, I would probably actually say that the very best parallel for the third Minions movie, it is the first Minions movie, but good this time. We very recently did coverage of the first Minions movie, the most terrible Minions movie as we called it, and that's very true now, where in a lot of ways the premise was the same. We get a little bit of a montage of what the Minions were doing up to a certain point. The Minions are thrown into a reflection of the real world but in a time period, and it all comes together with some final boss fight at the end. And ironically, pretty much all of the criticisms I had for the first Minions movie are directly addressed and fixed for this movie. We talked about with that first movie that you have 3 Minions to follow for actual plot, and then it cuts away to the ensemble cast doing nothing. The Minions become the sidekicks in their own movie. In this film, we still have a handful of named notable frontline minions, as well as a separated minion chunk, and one that's named as well. But that's kind of the point. They've given a named one to the ensemble group, and both of them are involved in this location plot. To the point that they both sever, go off their own paths, and combine again by the end. What do you know? So simple. And at times, I was more intrigued with the ensemble plotline than I was with the main one and the Cthulhu baby. We'll get there. I'm avoiding story-specific spoilers until the ender part of this video, if you care about the plot of Minions 3. But overall, it's a good time, however vaguely I wrap it up. So I guess while briefly poking on not saying the specific details, another main criticism of the first movie is the fact that the main villain is incredibly boring, and you don't really know her motivations. This one's pretty clear, and I think they're pretty enticing. There are some really interesting new characters in this world, and they do good things with them. Genuinely, actually, might be one of my favorite characters in the whole saga. One of them, the one that looks like a British politician. We'll go into the details about that one later. There's a couple interesting messaging things that are kind of hidden as the background of what this movie's somewhat trying to say, if it even has something to comment on. And it does a really good job of severing away from a lot of easy red flags to fall into when you're setting a movie in the 1920s. There are some outdated things that could be shown, reflected, or pointed out, and I think they do a really nice spin that fully fits into 2026. And just generally is a good natural dodging of things. The jokes are funnier, the movie feels a bit looser around the edges, and by the time you get to the credits, they're still feeling open to make parody-esque jokes. Like there are a bajillion post-credit scenes, kind of rolling off of the same idea multiple times, with a nice little bit of fun. Or even just really specific ones I appreciate, like when they show the casting for who did the score gets a big flourish, and then goes back to boring music in the credits. Like that's nice. It's so free for once. This is a movie that feels like it's okay to make fun of itself or just have fun with the premise, which is something not a lot of studios are really doing right now. It's crazy it's coming out of Minion movies, but it is. Hey there you can make it to the halfway mark of this video, or spoiler territory, we'll see. Come subscribe if you haven't already for more animated movie reviews. We'll do an amazing on this movie when it comes out on DVD, or otherwise there's all sorts of other upcoming movies coming up soon. Trailers, amazing videos, terrible videos, all sorts. So thanks for joining along, and now to the second half of our review of Minions and Monsters. Alright, let's get into the actual story behind Minions 3, because the spin they've put on it all, I think, just works really nicely. So the very first surprise is that the opening scene doesn't actually take place in the 1920s, it is instead set in a film museum, as we're gonna get a narrator telling us about the events of James and Henry, our protagonist minions, set all those times ago. With it being a museum scene, it does lead into a reference feast of point, look, and recognize. And to be fair, some of it is just point and look, but it's not just the logo of something. It's not something faint. You can see an airplane tied into a knot like the poster from Airplane. You can see a wax figure of director Orson Welles that they don't directly address, but he is in the background. Sometimes it is like a, wow, look, it's E.T., and that's a bit like, oh yeah, alright. But then other times when they do point out a joke, it's a wax figure of George Lucas in a little glass, who then turns out to actually be him, cameoing as himself, moving and voicing and everything. Nice. Simple. I like it. As we then get into the actual plot, much like Minions 1, it is a montage of the Minions finding other big bads. There'll be a pirate, there'll be a cowboy, there'll be a giant cyclops that apparently is also canon in this universe, much like wizards and vampires. They have all the classic fun with it. The wizard gets completely eviscerated by a laser beam, and the Cyclops ends up stepping on a prehistoric minion-made Lego that eventually kills him too. The act of him stepping on that Lego is the closest thing to a third action sequence we get. A lot of chaos ensues, but I don't quite think it has the same weight. It's just a nice classic little bippy. Until all the minions go off to travel further around the world. Apparently in the lore now there are actually multiple different tribes of minions, which explains why we haven't heard of some of these named minions coming back in other time periods. Maybe it's an excuse. Until the minions of this movie all find their way into Hollywood and completely dominate the stage of silent cinema, whereby there's a brilliant sequence of them crashing into Hollywood on a train, literally having the whole ensemble lead the train left and right to dodge everybody, running over rooftops that then severs the front of a house that then lands over Buster Keaton. You see Charlie Chaplin in a factory sequence. It's a great love letter to that era of cinema in a way that is a nice new layer of the minions inserting themselves. You even see, in fact, I forgot this, the actual opening credits shows a montage of the very first examples of film we've ever seen. Whether it's the frames of a horse running, or the train coming towards the camera, or just workers coming out of work after a long day at the factory, where they then superimpose the minions in grayscale into that footage. Proper, what's his name? Tom Hanks. Proper Forrest Gump style. That's the kind of artistic licensing that they're just free to flourish with that I wish more movies did. I don't know why I would want to see the K-pop Demon Hunters in old school footage, but apparently I think that would be artistically integral. And again is why I think the minions being set in the real world is more interesting than this fantasy spy villain thing they've made up now. Baffling what a simple change can bring. But anyway, as things escalate, there is a divide within the ensemble. There is the handful of minions that just want to make a movie, because we have James now, a protagonist minion who has the striving to make art and tell stories, and you've got Dick. That's literally the name of one of the minions. They're being more loose with their jokes, who acts like a dick to everyone, nobody likes him, and he still wants to find the big bad villain, because they kinda don't have one in the 1920s. Add on to the fact that they are then kicked out of the cinema experience. They become big celebrity Hollywood names, but they become irrelevant due to the introduction of sound from the 1920s, where suddenly their intermixed gibberish doesn't translate into film, where they showcase that by reflecting several movie scenes where they ruin the line by not saying the line. Outright doing, again, another Citizen Kane thing, not saying the word rosebud when dying in the bed. Nice, lovely. There's a reason this movie came out with 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's literally leaning for the critics to say, hey, here's some good things you'll like. But even if I wasn't interested in film or didn't do any kind of film studies, the fact that they're willing to be a parody, I think just fits way better for the Minions as a brand. I mean, the whole thing is about trying to make a movie for the Bright Brothers. Clearly a banterously disrespectful take on the Warner Brothers. They're kind of the closest to an antagonist socially in this film. And when they do get kicked out, there is a hint of emotional weight with how destroyed James feels about losing his dream, and the main movie director guy Max genuinely feeling distraught for his friends. There's something there. Similarly, we really learn about a close bond between two minions with James and Henry that's surprisingly wholesome to see, and a relationship I think we're not really used to seeing in any of the Despicable Me movies, not between minions anyway, that opens up with them hugging before realizing that maybe they shouldn't be so lovey-dovey huggy because of the social expectations of masculinity. They don't hug for the whole middle chunk of this movie. And that's kind of a point. More in the background, but it's one of the messaging that we'll loop back to by the end. Anyway, with the two splitting into two teams and working out what to do after film, we have the main thing you've seen in the trailers of our small central characters summoning Cthulhu, who's just a tiny baby child, who then goes on to gather more big monsters, as well as eventually summoning the giant blob Irene, who I thought was a bunch of minions because I can't tell the difference between yellow and orange apparently. Oops, you can see the comparisons. There was just a creative overlap. Meanwhile, the actual bigger ensemble go in a whole new direction I did not properly notice at all, and you probably wouldn't other than one marching scene, because they discover a guy at one of the first sci-fi conventions, also by the way another convention, Apparently Minions loves their convention scenes. Dressed up as an alien and living in a crappy apartment, who he says is actually a spaceship, but the whole time you're wondering, is he actually an alien or is he a guy in a costume really dedicated to the bit? This guy easily is my favorite character in this whole franchise because they've just sort of nailed down what makes a character fun in this universe. Whether it's that hint of mystery, the way he addresses conversations in his dialogue, or just the damn concept of him. I don't know. They make a lot of fun out of it, and I really enjoy him. He's now the new big bad that the minions are gonna follow, saying that he does plan to enslave humanity and destroy the planet at some point. But he ends up getting distracted on a romantic plot of his end, which does sound like a lot now that I'm saying it, but it's genuinely fine, as he begins to fall in love with one of the members of the women's right activist protest movement. This was the red flag I was worried they could fall into. With it being set in the 1920s, even just showing all of the women as only having the role of receptionist or traditional housewife, I think is a weird background thing that could be unfortunately reflected and not addressed in this movie. I don't know, you know, there's gonna be a weird attitude around 1920s or 50s and backwards. But instead, with it being set in the 1920s and that movement going on, they specifically pick a character within that movement, and there's even a sequence where, because Robot Guy is briefly following them in their protest, the minions are all following along, joining the same protest. I think it's a nice way to create a good, well-written, and strong female character, even if she's set in the time that she is. I don't know. I think there was an easy pitfall that was available there that they absolutely didn't fall into. Well, and that's great. And in general, when we see all sorts of examples of cinema and actors playing roles, it's not just one great big sausage fest of white dudes, which is lovely to see. Anyway, with him falling in love with this woman, he then starts to delay on his world domination plans. Meanwhile, in very simple format, the monster side of things goes out of control, and the clash becomes the minions versus the monsters. What do you know? It makes sense, it's obvious, there's two plot lines, they split off and they clash by the end, and across the board has a brilliant, great chunk of antics and comedy. So many sequences take a creative choice. When Henry is being chased by two of the monsters, the camera pulls back, stays still, and time lapses like a kind of Scooby-Doo sequence, but in old school camera footage. That is clearly a homage to the style. There's lots of effort put onto old school camera and cinematography techniques. You see at one point the minions physically cutting up film and doing things. And there are a million jokes and expressions that are just not the standard. The score sometimes goes into that 1920s jazzy kind of brassy sound. Or there are several sequences where we do cut to black and white and silent, and big text comes in instead of actual narration. Across the board, directorially, there is so much creative flair because of the cinematic time period that the whole thing is set in. And it's just leaps and bounds of layers added on top of what otherwise would be, at its groundest level, you know, a boring minion fart show. It's like, that's not the entire concept of a Despicable Me comedy now. There's so many things layered on top that the fart joke practically doesn't exist. But stuff instead. 3 characters get stuffed practically rammed very far into their... I'm not phrasing it like that. I don't know how to phrase this. 3 characters in particular have a whole element of a focus on something going into their rear region. And across the board, this is just the best case example of an execution actually covered across the entire film, with all sorts of little ideas that just come together really nicely. All of the minions seemingly have names now. There's a montage of someone screwing it up for the big bad that's not the same guy. It's not James every time. When they call out for Chris in the trailer, that's the only time Chris is addressed. There's a Chris and there's a Brian, there's a Dick, and all the rest of it. And even in the credits, first they show the names of all the minions before they show the actual cast, and that all the minions are voiced by the same guy. Though I mentioned in the background a little bit of messaging of masculinity, by the end of the film, Henry and James choose to go back to hugging rather than fist bumping as they come over their masculinity hurdle, and it is said a little bit more upfront with the relationship between Robo Boy and Suffragette, whereby she literally says there's not a lot of men like you, and he says, what, because I don't suppress my emotions in order to hide any vulnerability. Like, that's just like a nice classic outsider direct statement that fits perfectly into the way that guy speaks and interacts. It's just a great little bonus message, which they play around with very well, set in the 1920s. Weirdly enough, by the end of the movie, Goomy, the little Cthulhu guy, doesn't turn into a massive beast himself. Maybe that's kind of original. He doesn't become a brute, he just rides the big blobby wave. But as the final climax of the movie comes together, the big twist comes in the fact that Robo Boy is actually a real-life life alien not from Earth. He wasn't cosplaying for Sci-Fi Con this whole time, and his apartment does in fact turn into a spaceship, and all of the ensemble minions, now with their new big bad, get their own personal little UFOs to fight with, laser beams and all. Some of them come with jacuzzis, because there's a million jokes inside of these little things, and they blow up the big blobby one together. Perfect, fantastic, couldn't ask for more. Split, find two people, they clash by the end, happy days. The character is crazy and fun. Apparently the minions met aliens before they met Gru, and the monsters are de-summoned back into their final dimensional hell. Only to reveal that the actual plot of the movie we just saw was in fact the Minions and Monsters movie that James has been pitching this entire time. One final step outside of the frame, you know, the classic thing, but it means technically they didn't kill any of the characters, which Illumination loves to get around. I mean, this movie was a lot more edgy than usual. The Cyclops gets skewered, the Wizard gets eviscerated, and a Royal literally gets decapitated. That is the entire scene. But they get around it by revealing that the monsters this whole time were props. We're actually set somewhat around some present day. It explains why we never heard the names of these minions before, or why they weren't already known by the first Despicable Me movie after being famous in Hollywood. And it allows them to address directly the camera as Goomy appears actually alive and says roll credits. Brilliant, don't need anything more. It's loose, it's a parody. The ending comes together nicely, and unfortunately, aliens at least probably aren't really canon. But it is a great ending, and the best case version of the same idea of Minions 1, origins of the Minions and real life time period, but actually done well, with villains and characters that are interesting, brilliant action set pieces and antics, and none of the minions feel like they are completely background characters to their own movie. I said last time that Minions 2 managed to master the formula of the Minions, but no. Easily, without a doubt, and I'll be surprised if they ever surpass this, but if they do, hell yeah to them. Minions and Monsters is easily, and I'll make a dedicated video for it in the future, Illumination's most amazing Minions movie. To be honest, I knew it would be this whole time. Just a shame Despicable Me 4 is in the middle, and they'll probably make a fifth one, where Gru has a whole super extended family now, and no one gets any damn screen time. They even explained Gru's dog with this one, saying they turned a normal dog into the rabbit dog using a spell. Great fun. Though to be fair, the credits say that James wrote and directed this whole thing in the first place, so it's just good fun all around. Nothing ironic about it. But on that note, I'm gonna finally end it off there. My name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do tell us your thoughts on Minions 3. You think it gets any better than this? You think they're done? Or hey, what are some references I missed in this movie? Tell me your favorites down below. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and more, but otherwise, I shall see you all in a little bit. Cheerio!